Vice Chair Johnston.
Present.
Member Bowling.
Present.
Member Turchek. Member Bathgate. Member Connect.
Present.
A quorum is present.
Item 1 on today's agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes of the meeting from May 4th, 2020? And I would assume the answer is no. Only two of us were at that meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I had an opportunity to review them, but since I wasn't here for that meeting, I think it would be inappropriate for me to act or vote on approving those minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to move for approval and adoption of the minutes from the May 4th, 2020 meeting.
We have a motion from Randy Bowling. I would second that motion. And this came up at a prior meeting as to whether we need to defer a vote or whether members of the committee not present are still entitled to vote on approval of the minutes, having not been at the prior meeting. I know this came up before. I don't recall the resolution. It seemed to me there was, we had advice from the from council that there was some way to get around this impasse.
Yeah, the way it's been presented before was that members who were not at the meeting could vote to accept the minutes that were there, even though they weren't present. So that would be acceptable. That was the direction we were given.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well. So the minutes are approved.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think everybody here I recognize, but if we could just go back and make sure that there's no public comment, open it up for that and see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I open this below public comment. Are there any members of the public present today who would like to comment? The record will reflect there are none. Moving to meeting item 2A, a discussion and possible action regarding electing a chairperson and vice chairperson for the Utility Finance Overcommittee.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Bowling.
In light of the discussion we had at the last meeting, which was in May of last year, and the effort to have some degree of succession planning with you becoming vice chair, I would move to elect Bob Johnston as chairman for a term of 1 year.
Second.
Any discussion? I would note that I will accept that, although on seniority, I think, Randy, you would be next up as chair, or have you already been chair? Have you already been chair? Or?
I have not, and I think that you'd be an excellent chair.
Any further discussion? Are we ready for a vote? We have a motion by Mr. Bowling, a second by Mr. Connect. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So We have selected myself as chair. Next item of business would be vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, in light of his experience and stellar personality, I nominate Mr. Bowling for vice chair.
We have do we have a second for that nomination?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Like the record reflect, it was 5-0 to make Randy Bowling vice chair. Moving on down to item 2B for information only, presentation on background and mission of the Utility Finance Committee in regards to Carson City water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities. We have Darren. Who do we have presenting here today?
Yeah, so I think as anybody comes up to the podium, we can make introductions, and just for the record, I'll start out. So I'm Darren Schultz, I'm the Public Works Director, and here before to go over this item will be Eddie Qualieri, our Water Utility Manager, and Andy Hummel, who is our Wastewater Utility Manager. So they'll be giving this presentation. Thank you.
I'll start it here. Again, for the record, Andy Hummel, the wastewater utility manager for Carson City. This item and the next one, we thought it'd be very useful to give some background of this committee, and then also some of the work that was done the last year and a half that this committee was heavily involved in, our recent rate study that was voted to implement in December. So Eddie and I were going to start with kind of a welcome presentation, the mission of this committee, background, a little bit of background on the utilities that we oversee. So the mission of this committee was basically to review our utility budgets annually and confirm that they are in compliance with established city financial policies. That was sent out in a welcome email that everybody hopefully received a couple weeks ago. It's also essentially a technical budget committee reporting to the Board of Supervisors. This was most recently utilized as we went through the rate study. This committee was really the kind of the nuts and bolts of what those rates look like and that review. We typically meet in the spring of the year to review the draft budgets and may meet more often as necessary, as Randy and Bob remember. It was a lot recently, but there's 3 utilities that are overseen: our water, wastewater, and stormwater utilities. We serve approximately 55,000 residents here in Carson City. And as I mentioned, we recently went through a rate review process by Far West Engineering. Brent Farr, our consultant, is here to go over that after Eddie and I talk. And as a reminder, those new rates go into effect this coming July 1st of 2021. So a little bit of history. This committee was established in 2013 by the Board of Supervisors. It was recommended in the rate study that was done at that time by FCS Group to monitor compliance of our utility budgets with the city's financial policies. They recommended a bunch of policies in that study, most of which the city went with. Those policies were included in that packet that was previously sent. And then also to provide budget recommendations annually regarding continued compliance with those policies. In 2016, another resolution was done updating the mission of the UFOC, provide a little clarity on the utility financial policies that we were looking at, and then also to kind of revise the meeting schedule to as necessary. In that original 2013 resolution, it was 4 times a year. If we're not in the middle of a rate study, that's a little bit of overkill, so decided to go to an as necessary. And as I've already mentioned, this committee was really instrumental recently in reviewing and guiding our utility rate update. Our rates for water and wastewater, that process, we use the existing model that FCS Group had done, and Far West updated all the parameters in there, did not look at changing the rate structure itself. The stormwater one is where the bulk of the work was. We did a lot of looking at different rate structures, trying to get some equity into those rates, which we'll discuss further later.
All right. For the record, again, Eddie Quaglieri, Water Utility Manager. It's good to see you all today. Recognize a few of you from past work experiences. So the water utility, I'm going to start, go through an overview of what it encompasses. Feel free to stop if any of you have questions about anything in particular. We are a fully 100% metered system on the water side. Our rates are based on usage. We utilize automatic meter reading, so there's a truck that drives around the system and picks up the billing reads. That's the basis of our billing. We're in the process of changing billing software, which is a big project. Been in the works for about 2 years now, so that's up and coming. Our system, our sources of our system are 25% surface water and about 75% groundwater. Our surface water comes from the Carson River, Ash Creek, Kings Creek, and the Marlette Lake water system. The groundwater is from 3 different groundwater basins, the Dayton Valley Basin, Carson Valley Basin, and the Eagle Valley Basin. We have an interconnection with the town of Minden, a 24-inch pipeline that's pumped from 3 wells from the town of Minden. It feeds Indian Hills, Douglas County, and then makes its way to us via the Sunridge Booster Pump Station. And we also have an interconnection with Lyon County over the hill at Mound House. The demands on the system, summer demands approximately 19 million gallons per day. The winter demands approximately 6 million gallons per day. We use annually about 11,000 acre feet of water. We have 17,000, approximately 18,000 connections, or customers we call them, but those are individual connections. Fairly low water loss, which is unbilled water. It hovers between 6 and 7%. That's an average over about 8 years now. Our employee overview, within your packet, there's at the very end of it, there's both water and wastewater organization chart. So you can look at that, but it's the water system's broken down in distribution and meters and production. We have 7 distribution staff, 4 meter techs, and 6 production FTEs. The production side deals with the wells, pumps, treatment plants, tanks, and then the distribution side fixes leaks, does construction work, development work, or help assist with development work, flushing, line locations, that sort of thing. And then meter staff, obviously, reading meters, fixing leaking meters, et cetera, customer service. The infrastructure we have in the system is comprised of about 340 miles of pipeline. That's not including service lines. We have approximately 4,000 fire hydrants we maintain and operate. We have 29 wells, 16 tanks, 13 different booster pump stations, and we have 16 separate pressure zones that are separated by about 51 pressure regulating stations. We have a surface water treatment plant, and we have an arsenic treatment plant that treats 2 wells in the Valley Basin. A couple recent and upcoming projects we have. So the interconnection with Minden, we just finished that project, which is a short section, about a mile of pipeline and a booster pump station, but it brings the water from Minden all the way up to our highest zone in the system. So we can distribute that Minden water anywhere in our system now, whereas it did just before dump into the valley, the lowest basin pressure zone. So that gives us a lot of flexibility. If we need to take down our surface water treatment plant up at Quill, we can do that, and we have a redundant source of water to bring to anywhere in the system. Yeah, oh yeah.
A minute
Ron?
there. Mr. Connect has a question.
I just wanted to ask a question. What's the nature of the contract with Minden? How long does that provide for, and how secure is it? Are there things that Minden or people in Douglas County can do to interrupt or reduce the take that we're getting there?
I believe it's I'll maybe default to Darren on this one. He was here when they created it. But
Yes, Darren Schultz for the record. It's a bit of a perpetual contract that continues on and on. It's hard for one party just to walk away because we're both parties are very invested in it, so it was written that way. There would have to be some very, very extreme breaches or problems before somebody could try to walk away from the contract. So it's very stable.
I'm glad to hear that, Ron Connect, by the way. But I also hear from folks in Douglas County that some folks on the Board of County Commissioners and otherwise in that area are concerned about their groundwater levels, and they believe that essentially the groundwater is draining from the high portions on the east and west parts of Carson Valley toward Minden, especially as they pump it. And I ask just because I have heard that some people might want to see what they could do to interrupt that flow and keep the water down there.
Before we move on from this page, Eddie, I will be informal as prior and use first names here if that's okay with everyone. So, I had a question on this page as far as that split of surface water 25%, groundwater 75%. Will that change when you complete or when Carson City completes that Quill water treatment plant update? Would that
So, yeah,
increase the amount?
I was getting to that. Yeah, it will increase that difference. So it'll probably take the surface water to maybe a 40-60 split or so.
Thank you. Any further questions while we're on this page?
Yeah, I was just going to go through the last couple.
Oh, I was asking
Projects.
any
Oh.
members of the committee any questions?
So
Go
just
ahead.
to finish up, we have a new well at our well site 3 coming online. We're in startup mode right now. We were able to triple the capacity of that well, so it was a good increase in our capacity. And then, a big portion of our rate increases deal with the Quill water treatment plant upgrade. So that's retrofitting that plant to be able to treat all the water resources that we have there. We're out for proposals for the design services currently right now for that project. So, and that's my water overview.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. I'll jump back into the wastewater utility overview.
Andy, before you jump
Yeah.
into that, Mr. Chair, Eddie, what's the timeline on the design proposal entering into an agreement and how long the design will take?
We're looking at about a year in design and then another year in construction.
Okay, thank you.
So, similar to the water group, we base some of our rates on usage. That's for our commercial customers. The theory there is water into the building is water out to the sewer for the most part. So that's the basis there. For residential, it's a flat rate. Typically, your house in the summer, you're doing a lot of landscape watering, things like that. So by doing the flat rate, you basically get to the average winter usage for those customers. We currently treat at our wastewater resource recovery facility, our treatment plant, about 5.2 million gallons a day. We're permitted for 6.9 million gallons per day. on average, so we've got some room left before we need to start looking at a plant upgrade. We did, in our recent rate study, in the 5-year CIP, basically at year 5, put some money in to start looking at facility planning for that facility. If growth continues, we projected we could hit our, basically at 85%, you need to start looking at what that next size is gonna look like. Currently, we have just under 16,000 customers on the wastewater side. A little bit of discrepancy there from the water, but as I mentioned, the commercial, a lot of times there'll be 2 connections there, one for landscaping and one for the domestic use. So we'll typically see a higher customer count on the water side. From a staffing overview, we have a lines maintenance crew. So they're the guys out on the streets. They might be videoing the lines, cleaning, things like that. Somebody calls in at midnight that their toilet's backed up and is it something wrong out in the street? They're the ones that are gonna respond, trying to keep those lines clear. On the treatment side at the plant, we have 9 staff members that are focused on that treatment. We have a supervisor, we have 4 operators that run the plant, and 4 mechanics. So they're running around making sure the pumps and everything are doing what they're supposed to do, maintenance, as well as lift stations and things like that out in the field. We have 1 chemist in our laboratory. And that chemist also does not only tests for our wastewater, but also the water side to ensure compliance and that the water's meeting the regulations. And then we have an environmental control and pretreatment group. That's 4 staff members there. They're the ones that go to permitting businesses, industries, things like that, restaurants, making sure grease traps are clean, that we're not having discharges to the sewer system that would upset the plant and cause a violation of our permit. As far as infrastructure we take care of, we've got about 233 miles of pipeline in the city to collect and transport the raw sewage to the plant for treatment. We have 5 lift stations, so basically pumps, areas of town that are lower than the plant, for example, that we need to lift that sewage back up to get it to gravity flow to the plant. We have our water resource recovery facility on 5th Street that treats the water. And once the water is treated, that is reused within the community at our 3 local golf courses and the prison farm. In the winter, we actually store that water in a storage reservoir east of town in the hills, Brunswick Canyon Reservoir. And then also, we have about 486 industrial and commercial users that are permitted through our environmental control group. As far as recent projects, our major one was the treatment plant went through some upgrades. Those were, the most recent ones were done in 2017, completed in 2018. Didn't focus on expanding our capacity, but it focused on getting the water cleaner and being more reliable. Did a lot of new processes, changed how we treat water, some odor control, things like that. If there's no questions, I'll jump over on the stormwater side. Historically, on the stormwater utility, this has been a utility that's been pretty underfunded. Darren can speak to that as well as some of our existing members, but historically, our rates were based on property zoning. So if you were a commercial property, it didn't matter what you were. If you were, a McDonald's on a small lot or Walmart, you were paying the same rate. We have a new rate structure taking effect this July that'll be based on the impervious area of the properties. So the pavement, sidewalk, rooftops, things like that on that parcel, anything that the rain would fall on and then not absorb in would run off. We grouped commercial properties into impervious area groups based on that size. A lot of the times the bigger parcels also have on-site drainage, so we didn't want to just do just a linear, 1 square foot would, if you were 10 times that, your bill would be 10 times that, because they did take care of some of that on their own. So tried to make it equitable in that way. And then the residential properties will be grouped into structure size billing groups to kind of represent that impervious area. Our customers, we have about 15,000, almost 16,000 single-family residential customers in that. So to do an impervious area calculation, basically looking at the maps and drawing around every house, would be an absorbent amount of effort. So it was decided that structure size would be a good surrogate to use there. So we have about a little over 17,000 customers on the stormwater side. As I mentioned, 15,600 of those are single-family residential, so they'll be in that structure size billing group. And then a little over 1,600 in the non-single-family residential that'll be done on impervious area of those parcels. For staffing on the stormwater side, right now we have a program engineering administrator. There's a lot of permitting and such compliance type stuff on the stormwater program. We have 1 maintenance personnel that works with our street crews. They tend to be the ones to get the call if there's a problem with the drainage, go clean a culvert, catch basins, do street sweeping, that kind of stuff. And then also an engineering technician that does field inspections, helping citizens with if there's a drainage problem, things like that. And as I mentioned already, but we're currently very limited on the staffing due to the historically low revenue stream in this program. The rate study included 3 maintenance and 1 technical staff members to be added. We're pursuing the first of the maintenance staff members with the upcoming budget. So as far as what they're responsible for, they manage our stormwater program and the permit compliance with that. NDEP issues us a stormwater permit, so a lot of compliance there. Project management of any projects that we have going on, and then really limited maintenance activities at this time. It's really reactionary. If there's a problem somewhere, go fix it, but not any proactive maintenance occurring. And that's with the increase in staffing, that's where we want to get, is proactive. As far as recent big projects, the money has largely been spent on things like the Carson Street project. Did some drainage improvements there. When the freeway went in, a lot of drainage improvements with that to connect to NDOT's work with the bypass and those kind of projects. And that's pretty much what Eddie and I had for the overview. Happy any questions you may have, or next item, Far West, we'll talk about the recent rate update study.
Any questions from the committee members for Andy on the wastewater, stormwater presentations?
All right.
Thank you. Yes, we're ready to proceed to item 2C on the agenda, presentation of results and outcome of the utility rate study performed in 2020 by Far West Engineering.
Come on up, Brett. You want it? You can have it. Yeah.
What's that? Oh, good. Well, hello, my name's Brent Farr. I'm with Far West Engineering, and like to just give you an overview of the rate work that we did over the last year. And there's quite a few slides here, so I'm going to try to just hit the key points and move through. I don't want to take you longer than you need to be, but just let me know if you have any comments or questions, and we can go from there. The presentation's going to look at the existing rates and connection fees, and just so you know, we did everything water, wastewater, and stormwater. So we're going to just kind of breeze through all 3 of those. The key thing to know about the prior rate study, it was done by the FCS group in 2012. So that was the study prior to this one. And typically, these studies go for like a 5-year period, and so that's what this was about. And the last rate increase from that study went into effect in July 1 of 2017, okay? The wastewater rate, at the time they did this, was a 15% yearly increase. That's quite a lot. But I'll explain the benefit of what happened there as a result. The water rate was 6.5% yearly increase. At the time when this was done, due to the housing recession and things that were going on, the Board of Supervisors voted against the recommendation for connection charges. And those remained at the existing fee schedule at the time, but there's more on that here in a minute. In 2015, the city adopted a water and wastewater connection fee ordinance. And as you can see at the bottom there, it was basically established in 2016 through 2021, and then it was indexed in accordance with the Engineering News Record CCI with a cap of 3%. So that's how the connection fees currently are being adjusted, is in accordance with the CCI. So that wasn't really part of our study, I guess is what I was going to say.
Mr. Connect?
Mr. Farr, or I guess we go by Brent.
Yeah, thank
I'm
you.
Ron. Since I'm the new kid, I can ask, what is SERC and what is WERC?
Do you remember?
Yeah,
the
on the
acronyms for those?
wastewater, the SERC is Sewer Equivalent Residential Connection. So basically an ERU, if you've heard that term, an equivalent
Yeah.
residential unit.
Okay.
We refer to it as a sewer equivalent residential
I should have
connection
known
in our
that.
code, yeah. And then the water would be a water equivalent residential connection. Yeah.
So those are for single-family homes. So then we got involved in updating the FCS models and updating the water and wastewater rates and the stormwater rates. And so that was our role most recently. We didn't modify the FCS model approach so much. We did a few minor tweaks to it to be able to kind of update it and make it more in tune with what was currently going on. So a few tiny modifications, but we basically stayed with the same rate model and rate approach, didn't tweak anything too much. We utilized an across-the-board rate change, in which case each customer would experience the same percentage of change. Whereas in some cases, when you modify rates, you might modify the whole structure, and that's not what we were doing here. Just a review over some of the financial policies that the city has. They maintain a certain amount of O&M expense on both the water and wastewater side. And when you exceed that minimum target, that excess cash is swept into a capital account to cover capital projects. And then they also have a minimum target balance for the capital account of 2% of system fixed assets, and that's kind of an industry standard. So, yeah, you kind of look at your total fixed assets and say, you know, we should have about 2% in our capital account, and they meet that. Capital funding, the model assumes that capital projects are not funded through the capital fund balance, will be funded through bond sales. So if they don't have enough for some reason, you know, it's a major project, they don't want to spend all the cash or they don't have enough cash, then of course you'd use bonds. But if you had enough and you didn't want to bond it, then you could just use the capital fund. A couple of debt service coverage goals. You know, we have a minimum coverage factor of 1 times annual debt service and an internal goal of 1.25 times annual debt service. So kind of a minimum and then a goal. And then a debt to equity ratio goal of no greater than 50% debt to 50% cash.
Brent, I had a question on that. As far as the 50% debt to 50% equity, how does that work for Carson City? I'm a little, that's 50, what's the denominator there as far as 50% equity cash? I mean, are you looking at total system investment or are you looking at something else there?
Hi, I'm Sherry Russell. I'm the CFO for Carson City. And the way that is determined, each fund has its own set of financials, basically. So it has working capital, which is basically your equity. So you take the total debt divided by that equity, and we try to keep it 50% or lower.
Of working capital?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
These ladies are here. Now, this is something that I think the city and the UFOC should be quite proud of, is this system reinvestment funding. And this, we call these different things. Sometimes people call it depreciation, or it's basically building up your reinvestment account for future capital reserves. And at the time that the study was done by the FCS group, there was really no system reinvestment funding taking place. So a 0% level. And then from there, they decided to implement a kind of a 20% increase per year until the point where they got to 100%. But look at the difference, $0 to $3.4 million, or in the case, all the way, going beyond that up to 3.8 million. But just looking at when they got to 100%, they were from 0 to 3.38 million. And then on the wastewater side, again, look how far we've come. 0%, $0 in 2013 to 2021, getting up to $4.2 million annually into the capital account for capital improvements.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. Brent, there are two ways you can look at this. One is from the point of view of the agency. And as you said, hey, it's really great to have 3.8 million out there in 4 years. The other point of view is the view of the customers. Now, the problem we have at one level is as decision makers, et cetera, as policy makers at a limited degree. If we were looking at taxpayers in general fund versus the city, our obligation would be to represent the viewpoint of the taxpayers. Since this is an enterprise effort, it's not completely clear who our client is, whether it's the agency or the enterprise, or whether it's taxpayer or ratepayers, as we call them. Can you give me any of your thoughts on how we find the balance there between the two, so that we're not just accumulating lots of good funding in case, I don't know, in case there's a earthquake above my house or something. But what's your view on the balance there between ratepayers and the enterprise?
What a great question, and a really good one too, because as far as the agency goes, their customer are the ratepayers, and there's a delicate relationship there. And you can see, like in 2013, there was no system reinvestment, and that was probably because they were sensitive to ratepayer impact. However, I think even for the ratepayer, there's a benefit to a system reinvestment funding level, preferably at 100% as a policy, and here's why. I've worked for a lot of communities over the years, and I've seen many of them not have a balance for capital improvement funds in the future, and that really impacts them at some point down the road. And it's a generational thing. For example, if you kept it at 0% for 20 years, those people paying rates for those 20 years really get a pretty nice rate. And then the time comes where a lot of things are dilapidated and need to be replaced, but no money was set aside. That next generation, or that group that's now paying rates, is paying an elevated level to catch up. And The number two, the system reinvestment funding is based on the rate at which your existing assets are being depreciated. And so it's kind of nice to say that, hey, well, at least at a minimum, what we're doing is we're setting aside some money for the day when this has to be replaced. And as opposed to having to do it in an emergency or something like that.
I like that answer, but I would add one thing. There is a rate effect, a discontinuity. Trying to think of the term for that, but there is a rate shock, as we used to call it, for the future ratepayers. On the other hand, that's to cover the cost of the facilities that are being built to serve them going forward. And today's ratepayers get, I won't say no, but they get minimal benefit from those future resources. You know, the assurance that the water will be there, the sewer will be there, et cetera. So I guess my thought is, as we go along and I learn a few things, the funding strategy, today's ratepayers versus future ratepayers, has to be coordinated with the resource planning and the capital development, so that you have a balance there, that there's an assurance of service quality going forward, and at the same time, we're not using today's ratepayers to essentially subsidize tomorrow's ratepayers. Thank you.
That's a
Mr.
good
Chairman.
statement. Thank you. Let's just talk about the rate approach here and the refresh approach. We basically obtained current financial data and entered and updated all the data in the model. The model is pretty cool because, you know, once it was built, you could just go in and add, you know, the current financials in there. And that actually sounds simple, but it took quite a while because there's a lot in that model and there was a lot of things that needed to be adjusted and understood. And so it took quite a long time to do. We got it all updated and applied economic and financial factors to the future forecast and kind of massaged that a little bit. And everything, you know, ended up working out okay. There were a few things that we didn't understand about the model that we had to get clarification on, and finally we got all that figured out. The process for getting the rates approved, we did have quite a few meetings with the UFOC, and then Board of Supervisors meeting on March 5th. We made recommendations for 3% for water, 3.5% for wastewater to be effective July 1, 2020. I'll explain here in a minute, though, that since they didn't get implemented until 2021, there was a compounding of the first 2 years for July 1. And on that Quill water treatment plant, Board of Supervisors approved recommendation with Quill to be slated for FY 2021, which means I think it got moved up a little bit because of the favorable interest rates that we're currently experiencing. So good opportunity to take advantage of those. And then in December of 2020 at the Board of Supervisors meeting, that's where they decided not to implement it until July 1 of 2021, as Eddie and Andy just said. So that delayed the financial impacts, but it did compound them a little bit. And this is how it was scheduled. So the annual rate increase for the Board of Supervisors rate schedule was 0% until July of 2021, in which case it was 6.09% and then 3% each year following for 4 years. I mean, a total of 4 years. It's kind of a neat little slide that just shows how system reinvestment funding takes place. And if you look at the dashed line, that's how revenues would be under existing rates over time without any increases, and then the solid line kind of shows keeping pace with all of the increased costs, with projected new debt and O&M and system reinvestment funding. These are just little outputs from the model that are kind of nice. So it shows like on days of O&M, it'll show you how we're meeting the minimum of 60, and sometimes we're a little bit above. And then it also shows the capital fund and how you have a minimum target balance and then what's actually in the account. And so you can see on this water slide, we actually have more in the capital account than we currently need, but you have that Quill water treatment plant project coming. And so it's going to be nice to be able to utilize some of the cash for that and then bond for some. I'll just let you kind of absorb that. I don't, there's a lot of numbers there, but you have it in your packet, so. So here we are on the wastewater, same kind of thing where nothing happens until July 1, wherein we have a 7.15% increase in July and then 3.5% in the following years. Same kind of thing, just showing the various results financially, and there's the rates. Single family of 40, 45 going to 43, 34. Couple of additional policies that we index both the water and wastewater annual rates to the CPI with a minimum of 0% and a maximum of 3% starting in July 1 of 2025. So that's after the rate, increase is fully vetted out and takes place, that you'd have at least a maximum of 3% starting in July 1 of 2025. And maintain the updated rate models throughout the study periods to track impacts to both utilities. So you can kind of, as you go along, you can kind of see if your targets were right, if you overshot or undershot, and so you can kind of look at little adjustments that you might need to make along the way. And then there was some significant interest, I think, from various, both UFOC and Board of Supervisors, to allocate some money into what's called the Utility Ratepayers Assistance Program, which I thought was cool. I mean, that's just, somebody's having a hard time paying a bill because of a hardship or a financial problem, that there would be a fund to provide some assistance, which you don't see everywhere. I thought that was pretty nice. Any question on the water and wastewater rates? Yeah.
Questions for Brent? Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only question I have is on that last point where you're talking about essentially providing benefits, welfare at a certain level for people who've fallen on hard times. And my question has nothing to do with an objection to doing that. I think that's a legitimate function of local government. The question is, there are other sources for those people, and are we committing too much overall, or more than we need to, when you consider the other sources? And secondly, the other sources are explicitly welfare-based, where we say we're going to take care of people, and that's the purpose of this fund and the spending from it. This is taking the enterprise and saying the enterprise is going to take care of those people, not an expressly welfare project of the government. And I just wonder what thought was given to how much we should be doing through the enterprise.
I think maybe it's a great one for Darren. It's kind of a political, it's a political question. I didn't have any insight on that myself, but.
Yeah, thank you. That is a very good question. I'll give you a little brief history on it. There was a couple of the committee members will remember there was a little bit of a committee that was established to just specifically look at this there was a couple of Board of Supervisors on that and a couple members from this committee and to the DA's office to look at exactly what this program could be, what it should be, and to kind of answer your question specifically is this idea is this would be seed money to get it established. And meanwhile, they would be looking for other funding opportunities to keep it going into the future. And so when the utilities switch over to the new billing, there will be an opportunity on your bill for customers to say, if your bill is $61.10, you can round up, and then that 90 cents goes to this fund, and other types of things like that, to where the funding could be found elsewhere. But this initial 10,000 was set aside as seed to kind of get it started, and hopefully over time that would get less and less and maybe even go away.
I got to tell you, when the IRS asks me to make voluntary contributions on their form, I don't.
Darren, I had a follow-up question to that. Do you know how much of that was distributed to ratepayers in 2020?
So this program got set up 3 years ago, and initially there was no seed money provided by the utility. This would be the first year that seed money is going by the utility. So prior to that, it was only based off of donations that they had received. And it's my understanding that first year they got about $1,000 worth of donations, and that was this program is administered by Fish. It's not administered by the city. Fish is the one who takes care of it. They go through and look at all the applicants and determine the need. And then this last year, there was no donations, so nobody was helped through the program this prior year. So this coming year is the first time where this seed money is being provided.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about stormwater just for a minute. One of the big things about the stormwater, they were mentioned by Andy, covered well. Two things. It was really heavily underfunded in order to meet their objectives and goals, I mean, significantly. And the other thing was there was a number of inequities that existed between customer types, and so we'll talk about that. So we looked at the inequities and kind of also ease of implementation and different things like that, because what we were doing here is a full modification to the rate structure. They had current revenues of about 1.8 million, and they needed an additional 1.4. So that's a big problem, you know, when you need to go, it's almost a doubling of the revenue. And the basis for the revenue requirement and the rate increase, you know, they want a good program. They want to provide good service, but of course, you don't want to go overboard and have an excessively expensive program that's going to impact people in a negative way. But they weren't even really able to support a very reasonable capital improvement program. And quite honestly, wasn't really self-sustaining. So important to kind of beef this up and allow it to be at least self-sustaining. I won't get too much into this. This is more kind of what Andy covered, but this is, you know, a stormwater program is a lot more than what most people think. You know, they probably don't understand that there's floodplain management and water quality and, you know, all kinds of, you know, operation and maintenance and all this that goes on. There are still a lot of communities around that don't even have a stormwater rate or a stormwater utility. They just kind of bury it in the sewer fund. And so it's Carson City's been progressive there, and I think they, you know, just from my perspective, working with a lot of communities, I think that they should be commended for that. I'm not going to go through all this, it's just too much. The existing rates were as follows. You know, you could see there was single-family rates of about $570, multifamily, public property, and so on, going down the line here. But we went back and kind of looked at how all that was put together, and it was a little hard to get back to the origination of all of it and to make sense of it, you know, in terms of, you know, why does one customer pay one thing and another customer pay another? And I want to get to that here. I think we have on the next slide, yeah. The inequities, and I wanted to use an example. We actually found quite a few examples and showed all those, but, take like a residential office, and so that's a zoning where a person may or may not be operating a business out of their home. It's just the way that their property's zoned that they could. And we had someone like that. They're like, well, I don't operate anything out of my house. I mean, it's zoned that way. But they, as a result, were considered commercial property and paid the same amount that Walmart paid. So on a like a per square foot basis, it was way off, in terms of what one would pay versus another and so forth. And that was one thing we had to kind of take a look at and say, well, let's get it a little more equitable. We didn't want to go to the extreme, although we looked at it of saying, okay, let's do everything on a per square foot basis. So you had a home that was, 10,000 square foot parcel, and you would actually calculate how much impervious area there was, and then you would say, okay, then Walmart has this much impervious area, and that they would pay that much. And it was pretty extreme. I mean, you had people that were going to be paying, thousands of dollars a month, for their stormwater. And that would have been adverse to commercial and commercial development and things like that. So there was a lot of debate about, well, who is the impact for and so forth. So we looked at all kinds of methodologies, and we went back and forth with the UFOC, and it was fun. I mean, we kind of had a lot of discussion about what was fair and what was important. We looked at keeping the rate structure the same. We looked at modifying it in various different ways, doing this impervious area method. Then we came across this grouped impervious area method that said, well, let's just group them in small, medium, and large. That way there's some benefit to the really big and some benefit to the small, some disbenefit to the really small because they would pay more of an average, but the Walmarts wouldn't be paying $3,000. And the same with like school districts and things like that. You got a question here?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you. I was sort of there at the founding because I chaired the 2001, 2002 Utility Advisory Committee where we looked at a lot of these things. And essentially, coming from my background in regulation, I was pushing for classic marginal cost studies and Ramsey pricing and that sort of thing. You can't do Ramsey pricing for water because essentially everything will get thrown into the monthly customer charge. My impression of what you're talking about here is that items 4, 5, and 6, well, 4 and 5 in particular, are an attempt to get away from the classic cost allocation after the fact type studies and rate design and move toward something that's that's driven by the demand, the impervious area, et cetera, and that's kind of a marginal cost thing. Would you agree with that, or am I, since I haven't studied the impervious area method, I just got here, but is that, are we moving toward cost causation and marginal cost concepts?
Well, you've referenced a method there earlier that I'm not familiar with. But
Ramsey pricing?
yeah, but I'll tell you, there was a lot of debate here about, who benefits, right? And who should be paying what? Because like I said, I mean, if you did it just simply by, okay, the concept is if I have a certain amount of pavement on my parcel, I'm contributing that much flow to the system, right?
Right.
Well, it's not really that simple. I mean, you have all the roads, for example, and they're not included. I mean, nobody's paying the drainage from the roads, and that's by far probably the most, right? But all the residents use the roads. So is it fair for commercial properties to pay just based on the parcel size? They may be paying a little too much because of things like that. And what happened was the UFOC kind of backed away from that idea. Now there was a lot of debate. You know, should it be strictly based on that, or should it be, you know, more based on other factors, you know, and try to make sure that some people weren't paying excessively too much. And it's a tough thing. And I mean, every community kind of approaches it a little bit differently, but I think we
Cost-
ended on a good approach here.
Sorry, cost causation, marginal cost, Ramsey pricing, and ultimately rate design is very much an art.
Yeah.
And it has some science behind it, as the chairman knows, but it's very much an art, and equity and fairness are always in the eye of the beholder.
Well, what a great statement. And I agree with that. I mean, I think engineers like myself and others that might do this would be, you know, approach it first from a science basis, right? But when it comes to the public and the interaction with the board, that's when it becomes more of an art, because you have people who represent the community that have different thoughts and feelings about what's going to be palatable, what makes sense to the businesses, what's going to work. You don't want to present something that's going to be totally rejected.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me there.
Towards the end, we came up with this idea on residential to do this tiered residential rate option. And Andy was a strong architect on that part of it and came up with some proposed methods and things that I thought were pretty clever. And he's kind of explained that. But here it is in a nutshell. There was also a requirement to do things on a prorated basis, meaning, you know, we were going to kind of implement this over time. But you can see for single-family residential by structure square footage, and there was both a, you know, single-story less than a certain amount and multi-story less than a certain amount, and you can see how it kind of progresses there and when those became effective. You know, whereas you remember before, I think a resident was paying like $5.69 across the board. But here now you've got, so if you have a multi-story house that's over 3,600 square feet, you're now ultimately going to be paying 15 instead of 569. But those on kind of a smaller square footage are going to pay about half that, or going to pay half that. Okay, and then the grouped impervious area property rates, you can see, we just basically did it based on the area of the property rather than, no, that was the impervious area, sorry, of the property. We kind of looked at both. We kind of looked at the size of the parcel, and then we said, no, we'll go ahead and look at the impervious area of every single non-residential parcel, and we did that. And so the small, we implemented right away, $30, because actually for most people, that would have been a reduction. I think the lowest rate was for a multifamily was $29.33, so they go up just a small amount. But you can see medium starting out at 45, then going to 60, and then it stays flat, and so on. The very large, 5 acres and more of impervious area would be implemented over the 4 years, 60 to 120 to 180 to 240. And that's how those got implemented. I won't belabor this, but there was a stormwater credit concept that went into play, and I don't know how much of that is going to be utilized, but you know, there is an avenue for someone who wants to have a credit by being a good customer and basically working with the utility to provide reporting, which is something that would be helpful to the utility and be beneficial to them, that there could be a credit there. I guess, any feedback on that at all yet? Or anybody, I guess, maybe it's not even in effect yet, but I'm just wondering if there's been any public feedback at all.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. For the record, Andy Hummel, wastewater utility manager. So the credit, we did discuss numerous credit options as we went through this process. We looked at if a parcel had drainage infrastructure on it, would they be eligible for a credit, things like that. And, you know, over time, codes and standards for development change. So what somebody did 5 years ago that was over and above what was required, today might be the minimum. So you're essentially giving a credit for something that today they'd have to do. So it wasn't, it was kind of hard to make the argument on that one. Ultimately, what we landed on was a reporting credit. So if the customer is they're, inspecting their drainage infrastructure, fixing, if there's sediment in their basins, things like that, taking care of it. And then send us in a simple report. We, inspected it, took care of deficiencies, or there were none. And see you next year. Thanks for accepting. They would get essentially 1 month billing off of their bill. This is something that then we can use those reports for our reporting to NDEP, Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, for our permit on an annual basis. We got a certain number of customers that did report. We can use it as, we're doing outreach to try to get our customers to report, and the importance of taking care of your storm drain infrastructure, things like that. So kind of a win-win. It saves our staff a little bit of time of not having to go out and inspect so many properties. And in exchange, we get a credit to those customers.
Let me stay up here for the last slide too, because, oh, yeah. Thought it was to the last one, but. There were some other policies, modifications that went into place. Basically the final approval was for the grouped impervious rate method with the residential tiered rates. Then they approved the phase-in approach, meaning that, some of the rates were going to take place over time. Then approved the credit approach. And then same with like the water and the sewer rates, they would do an index and tie the rates to the CPI beginning July 1 of 2024 after the phase-in. And so it just kind of stick with that as a minimum. Doesn't mean that they couldn't come back and reevaluate it. And then here again, looking at putting some money in the utility ratepayer assistance program. We've heard your comments on that. And then conduct rate refreshes every 5 years to ensure that rates are meeting the operating and capital needs of the utility. Andy, this is one I think maybe, I think this is one that maybe you added. Kind of the code stuff and the way that you did that.
Yeah. So kind of at the final implementation process, another concept that was brought forward by members of the Board of Supervisors was to utilize a utility rate fee schedule. And I brought copies that are over there on the where you walk in, but this is also posted on our website. So it'd be basically a standalone document, all of the rates, connection fees and such that the three utilities charge. Historically, those were in Carson City, our municipal code, Title 12. So it was buried in code, so a customer would have to go find the code to find that. We did have one-page summary sheets, but those would have to be updated every year to whatever the code said. And any time that a rate study would go into effect, there would be a significant amount of changes to the code that would have to take place. So the potential for error and impacts to code were always there. It seems like every time we do one of these, we find some things that, no, that's not what we meant. But so that concept of let's put those rates out in a fee schedule that is referenced by code was brought forward. So we created that. It is the same process in the future. If we want to do a rate increase, it still would go through this committee, go to the board, public comment, everything. But now instead of having to update municipal code, it's updating that fee schedule. And it also provides, now we have a document that's easy to publish on the website, easy to keep on hand at the front office at Public Works, where people come with questions to be able to hand them that and be easier to understand.
Okay, I think that's it. Andy, thanks for your help. And thanks for the comments. Any final remarks or comments?
Questions by the committee for Brent or Andy?
If I could. I'm having trouble with the mic here. I'm a sissy as far as getting the button to work. When it does, it sounds like I'm introducing the starting lineup for the Giants. The one slide, Brent, that you had for the stormwater approved rates, Just a quick question. After the recommendation went from the UFOC to the Board of Supervisors, is the only change in the effective dates the heading of each column?
Yeah, those effective dates, I believe we were originally going to do January 1st of each year. That got pushed to July 1st for all three utilities. And then the single-family residential was originally, as brought forward by this committee or recommended, going to be just a flat rate. And that was the other comment that we got back from the board, is they'd like to consider a tiered residential structure there as well to make it more equitable for the smaller versus larger customers.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Moving on to item 2D on the agenda for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding the tentative fiscal year 2022 wastewater fund budget. Its compliance with adopted financial policies and recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative wastewater fund budget for fiscal year 2022.
All right, thank you. My name is Pam Ganger. I'm the Deputy CFO for Carson City. And here with me is Jamie Stevenson, and she's our accounting manager. And we are going to look at all three of the utility fund budgets in order. Starting, of course, with this item is the wastewater fund. So a few things that I would like to point out up front that apply to each of the utility funds, so that I don't put you to sleep later by repeating myself over and over, is that, first of all, this is the tentative budget, is not the final budget. It will be going to the Board of Supervisor meeting next week. Secondly, as we've been discussing all of the rate increases, we did estimate the rate increases in the revenue effective 7/1/2021. So that's going to be the primary increase that you see in charges for services in revenue across each of the funds. Also, with regard to revenues, non-operating revenues, that's mostly investment income, and we budget conservatively. So if they look lower than in the past, that's primarily why. And then we do augment the budget later if the revenue ends up coming in much higher. Okay, and also across all three funds, salaries and benefit increases primarily include merit increases and no new employees. Medical benefits, we projected 0% increase for 2022, and PERS had a 1/4 to 1/2% increase. And finally, across all three of the funds, services and supplies have moderate increases, primarily due to internal service charges based on the citywide cost allocation plan. Okay, so as it pertains to the wastewater fund in particular, 2021, as mentioned previously, is year 5 of 5, so it's the final year of the phase-in for the connection fee income. Connection fees are an average, approximate average over the past several years. Salaries and benefits in the wastewater fund increased $46,028 over fiscal year 2021 estimated. And this is primarily, again, due to the merit increases and also projected retirements. Services and supplies decreased. It says in my slide there, I apologize, 89,542. That's actually the decrease in bond interest expense. But in services and supplies actually are projected to decrease 144,000 from fiscal year 2021 estimated into 2022. And that's primarily due to internal service charges, a decrease there of approximately 112,000. Facility repairs and maintenance decrease in about $81,000, and then professional services increasing about $45,000. So it's a combination of those is the primary reason for that. And then the capital spending plan for wastewater is $4,615,000, as we'll look at in more detail on this slide. So this is a list of the projected capital projects over the next 5 years. And any specific questions, I'll refer to Darren and Andy for that. And then this is just essentially the same dollars just presented by year. So over 5 years, projected $24 million in capital projects. And then finally, for wastewater fund financial policy compliance, with this slide, you can see that the wastewater utility fund meets all of the city's adopted financial policies. And the lines with the symbols represent the financial goals, and the vertical bars represent the projected cash balances. So you can see that a few years in the past, we had some high cash balances. That was primarily due to bond cash that we had in the bank. The projects had not been completed at that time, so the cash was still in the bank. Are there any questions on the wastewater fund budget?
Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one on those actual cash balances. If I heard you right, you're saying they were the product of essentially bond funding and not being able to spend as rapidly as we expected to. I guess if somebody asks about that, one answer would be that those dollars were very cheap, very inexpensive because of the low interest rates at the time. Is that a fair comment?
I would say that's fair. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Randy?
Pam, as always, you're so thorough. I feel like I'm way behind. On the wastewater fund screen that's currently up, it shows the capital reserve. The goal is about 2.2 million. And,
Yeah, that's correct.
And the actual reserve is closer to 4.04.
Right, so the goal is based on 2% of net capital. So that's where the goal calculation comes from. So it's right off of the financial statements, 2%. That's part of our financial policies.
Is there anything within that 4 million that we could utilize on projects?
Well, the 4 million is our reserve for capital projects.
I mean, the difference between the 4 million and the $2 million goal.
If I may, Darren Schultz for the record. So what we're doing on that fund, and it's been a little while, but as you know, we're collecting fees, connection fees, and we are stockpiling those separately because in anticipation of having to do the next expansion at the wastewater treatment plant. And the plan and part of the way the policy was written and our rate study is that we would be collecting cash from developers now to fund a large portion of that expansion so that current ratepayers aren't paying for expansion. So that money is going to continue to sit there in the fund year after year and grow until we do that expansion.
Perfect, makes sense. I have another question, going back a few pages. It's the details on the inter-service charge. Did I get the name right?
Internal service charges.
Internal service charge.
Yeah.
I readily admit this has been a rock in my shoe for every budget. But for the wastewater, it looks like it's essentially 40% of services and supplies. How much of that 40% does Public Works have as far as control over what they charge? I don't know
Well,
if did I word that correctly? Does it make sense?
I think I understand what you're getting at, and what I would tell you is that the cost allocation plan is developed by our consultant annually, and she meets with each of the departments through the city and determines the hours that they spend doing certain billable functions that would be charged back to the department. So, finance and legal and HR and all these other functions. So the services that are provided to the utility funds are based on their needs, essentially. And they are reviewed at the end of the year and trued up. So I would say yes, essentially they are in control of that in terms of the number of hours requested.
Okay. That's all I have for this one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This might be more of a question for Andy, but do you guys know roughly when you plan to hit, or not plan, but expect to hit the 85% for the wastewater treatment plant?
Yeah, we're predicting it's about the 8 to 10 years out.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Further questions on the wastewater fund? And this is on for, item 2E is on for possible action by the committee. Do we have a motion to approve the wastewater fund, tentative wastewater fund budget for fiscal year 2022?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to make a motion.
Do we have a second?
Second?
Discussion, any discussion on this item? Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, are we looking at what was labeled as page 81, I think, in the packet we got to begin with? Is that what we're considering here?
Pam, can we pull it up on the screen so we have it for the, so everyone's looking at the same document?
I just learned a long time ago, Mr. Chairman, to always be sure of what you're voting on.
Yes.
This is the tentative wastewater fund budget, so this is the whole budget, is it not? Not just capital expenditures?
This is the tentative wastewater fund budget.
And is that shown on one page in the presentation? It's several pages, Andy, is what I'm hearing?
Yeah, the packet is 66 through 82, I believe.
Yeah, the wastewater budget is pages 66 through and including page 83. That is the total and complete wastewater budget, which is what the vote is for currently.
Mr. Chairman, for clarity, I'm happy to restate the motion.
Go ahead, Randy.
I move to acknowledge that the tentative wastewater fund budget for fiscal year 2022 is in compliance with the adopted financial policies, and to recommend that the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative wastewater fund budget for fiscal year 2022.
As amended, do we have a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? So the motion is approved 5-0. We can move on to the next item on the agenda. My apologies, I'm scrolling very slowly on this computer for some reason today. Which would be item 2E, discussion of possible action regarding the tentative fiscal year 2022 water fund budget, its compliance with adopted financial policies, and recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative water fund budget for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you. And this, for your reference, would be the materials in your budget starting on page 85 through 100. Okay, so as with the wastewater fund, the rate increases are included in the estimated revenues for fiscal 2022. And again, it's the 5-year phase of the connection fee increase. So this is the final, 2021 is the final year. So you will see no increases in fiscal 22. Here we have salaries and benefits are fairly flat from estimated fiscal year 2021 with a combined decrease of $2,400. Services and supplies increased by $32,900 over estimated fiscal 2021. And this is a primary result of the internal service charges, again, increased $102,000. And then with the Douglas County water purchase is projected to be less than what is estimated for fiscal 21 by about $90,000. So that is the net there is about close to our change in supplies and services for the year. And then our capital outlay plan for fiscal 2022 is $4,664,000. And here's our detail of the planned capital expenditures over the next 5 years for the water fund. And again, I'll refer any specific questions to Darren and Eddie on this one. And again, this is just by year. And finally, with the water fund, as you can see here, meets all of the city's adopted financial policies. And the spike in the green capital reserve bar again in 2019 represents the increase in cash due to the receipt of the $10.1 million bond for the 2018 B water refunding bonds that we did, and as well as the $7 million bond monies used with the east-west transmission main project. And then also, I wanted to mention that because of the debt refunding of that $10.1 million, and with the capital asset additions and normal principal pay downs, our debt-to-equity ratio in this fund actually met, we actually met all of our financial policies for the first time in fiscal 2020 since we started measuring back in fiscal 13. So we're pretty happy about that. Are there any questions on the water fund?
Questions on the water fund?
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Randy, go ahead.
Similar question on the water fund as I had for the wastewater fund. On the slide that's currently up, capital reserve, we've got about 4 million over goal. Is that being stockpiled for the Quill plant?
Yes, I would say it's being stockpiled for Quill and other capital projects. And
Okay.
again, I would mention, Darren and Eddie can speak to all the projects that they've got lined up for that.
Yeah, if you look at the capital sheet, page 98, so the next 5 years. So in 2022, you can, if you look 3/4 of the way down, there's $1 million and that's going to go towards the design of the Quill. And then next year is when we plan to do the construction. And so we're going to bond a portion of that. So we'll use on-hold or on-hand cash that's available and then bond the rest up to that $9 million or the total cost of the project.
Okay. Thank you. Back to the previous slide. Thank you. System reinvestment. There's about roughly a $3 million difference between the actual funds or projected funds and the goal. Could you explain what that is?
The system reinvestment funding goal is based upon the estimated depreciation expense versus the capital reserve goal, which is based on 2% of assets.
Specifically, the difference between the 6 million and the 3.5 million.
So the system reinvestment funding goal is 3.5 million, and what we actually are projecting out is 6.2 million would be available. So we're exceeding our goal by that much, which would be available for capital funding.
Okay.
Same answer to what I gave last. It's the same money, looking at it twice.
The same thing, only different?
Yep.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Following up on that, Darren, was that projected? I mean, is that a surprise in this projection that that'll be close to 6.3 million? I might have missed it in your answer to Randy.
So if you go back at what for 2022, and if you look at our capital, what we want to spend in 2022, it's $4.664 million, right? So that's what's planned to be spent. And then if you look at what's available is that 6.29. So the difference between there is basically cash that's in the fund that we are not planning to spend this next year on capital, but it would be spent the following year when we go to do the Quill. So we're trying to stockpile a little bit of cash over the last couple of years to put towards the construction of Quill so the bond is smaller. So it's by design, if that answers your question.
Thank you. I think I get it now. So, Any further questions on the water fund budget? Ron, sorry.
I'm ready to offer a motion if that's appropriate.
Do we have a motion?
Okay, so one thing I learned a long time ago, Mr. Chairman, is when you can attach your name to a cut of capital outlay by $7 million and a cut of total revenues by 300,000, that you don't pass up that opportunity. And therefore, I move to acknowledge that the tentative water fund budget for fiscal year 2022 is in compliance with the adopted financial policies, and to recommend that the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative water fund budget for fiscal year 2022.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion by the committee? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. I believe we are now on item 2F for possible action, discussion regarding tentative fiscal year 2022 stormwater utility fund budget is compliance with adopted financial policies, and recommending that the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative stormwater utility fund budget for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you. And again, Pam Ganger, Deputy CFO, and just for your reference, the pages for this budget in your materials are 101 through 115. Okay, so last but not least, the stormwater utility fund includes the rate increases as well. In 2021, we had some grant revenue received for the Oregon stormwater drainage project. So if you noticed in your materials, you didn't see that repeated in 2022, that's because it's just a one-time grant. Salaries and benefits decreased about $5,500 in combined over the estimated amounts for fiscal year 2021. And again, primarily due to merits and benefits. And then services and supplies decreased in total about $57,500 over estimated 2021 due to several things here. We had an increase in professional services of about $20,000 for funding engineering studies and design for stormwater projects. We have increased internal service charges of about $14,000. And we incorporated $10,000 for the utility assistance program. And we also have a little bit of extra money that we're going to be spending on fire suppression. It looks like the Nevada Division of Forestry assessed fees decreased, but they might go back up again. So we might see a little bit of variation there. And then we also have our capital outlay plan for fiscal 2022 is $2,045,000, as the detail shows here on our planned capital expenditure page. And again, we have just the totals broken out by year down here. Our 5-year total is $10,105,000. And then here's our stormwater utility fund financial policies. Again, the tall green bars represent cash from bonds that we had received in late fiscal 2018. And then those are mostly spent by now. So We won't see that in fiscal 2022. And then the Stormwater Utility Fund budget meets all of the city's adopted financial policies. Are there any questions here on the stormwater budget?
Members of the committee, any questions on the stormwater budget?
Can I, real quick, I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with that internal service charge. I know Randy's been on the board for a while, and he seemed not real happy with it. So I just want to make sure you understand the breadth of what is in there. So basically, because we're a city, a lot of the functions of the city help this utility fund. So in the general fund of the city, we pay for Darren's time, we pay for a lot of the project managers, we pay for a lot of the engineers, and then most of their office staff is also paid for in the general fund. So that's about a good $3 million that we allocate to all of the public works departments, not just water and sewer. In addition to that, the treasurer's office is the one collecting the utility billing money. They don't have to have an attorney because we have the DA's office. City manager has a little bit, the board of supervisors has a little bit of budget. Finance, we help them with all these crazy budgets and presentations. And, they don't have an HR department because the city has an HR department. So that's all those costs are going into, if we sold this to a private owner, they would have to pay these costs. Does that help a little, Randy? Does that make sense? I know it's a big number, but there really is a lot that goes into it.
Every year I get on the ledge and you successfully talk me back. But I fully understand the reallocation.
Okay, I just didn't want anybody worried about it, because it is a big number, but.
The real challenge I have is understanding how much control the public works or the engineering managers or the public works directors has over that amount of money.
Yeah, and that's why we use a third-party consultant, so that nobody can manipulate those numbers. So they actually go off of the audited financials and how much time we actually spent in those departments. And then we project from there what we think is going to happen in fiscal '22. And we ask Darren to say, well, are you going to be doing the same thing in '22? Are you going to be focused more on water or sewer or RTC? And we ask them to, project that. And then we later in '22, when we have those actual numbers, we true it up. So we make sure Darren's estimates were accurate.
I can see where the charges between water and wastewater, one went up, one went down.
Right,
So I
because
did-
they
I
were
did see
doing
that.
the big sewer project for a long time.
Okay, I'll step back.
And Ron will step forward. Ron?
Thank you.
Just one observation on that from the industry as a whole. For many years, the city of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power used this kind of charges basically to milk the enterprise for the benefit of the general fund, and so that the city could claim that they were holding down taxes and that sort of thing. But what came in one pocket went out the other, essentially. So people are naturally always skeptical that we can audit and verify those charges. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did have a follow-up question. Is there variability in that allocation? I mean, I assume it's formulaic, but does it bounce around for reasons that are difficult to explain? Just because, with any methodology of allocation, are there unanticipated events or just little quirks that cause it to tip one way or the other between departments in the city?
It definitely changes based on what's going on in the city. The South Carson Street project, a lot more was allocated to RTC as opposed to, streets and sewer and water. And with the big sewer plant, that was a $50 million project. So, there was more time just of everybody that was allocated to that project. So it doesn't change really that much for the treasurer because they're collecting the same amount of bills. Finance, we're pretty much doing the same amount of work, but based on the engineers and the directors and people charged to the Public Works Department and how their time is allocated, it does change based on what they're doing.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes. Do we have a motion for approval?
I move to acknowledge that the tentative stormwater utility fund budget for fiscal year 2022 is in compliance with the adopted financial policies, and to recommend that the Board of Supervisors approve the tentative stormwater utility fund budget for fiscal year 2022.
Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to point out that Darren and his staff and the financial staff, this committee and the board, there's been real challenges over a number of years to try to get money and meet these financial policy goals. And it's been an uphill battle, not for any specific reason outside of, like Andy said, it's just been underfunded for years. So it's an absolute thrill to sit here with a motion like that on the table where it meets all the policy goals. Well played.
Thank you, Randy. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries 5-0. Moving on to item 2G on the agenda, presentation and discussion of manager's report on personnel, projects, and planning.
This will be a really pretty quick item. Eddie and Andy will kind of hit the highlights of what's going on. So the end is in sight for this. Thank you very much for your patience. We're getting closer.
All right, well, we're back. Eddie Qualieri for the record, Water Utility Manager. I'm just going to go through, I already, in our previous presentation, we talked about a few projects. I'll just quickly rehash those a little bit. Well 3B was recently re-drilled. Obviously, we're working on the Quill project that's going on right now, and finished up the major transmission main project. The last piece being known as East-West transmission main. Some future projects that we have coming that are in design right now are Prison Hill Booster Pump Station, and that's a booster pump station that will replace 2 underground existing booster pump stations in the southeast portion of town that we call Desert Hills and Shadow Mountain, but are basically along Edmonds and South Edmonds area. So, and against Prison Hill there. So that's a big project that we've been dreaming about for a while. It'll replace 2 underground booster pump stations that are hard to maintain, that are aging. And so that will be 1 booster pump station to serve 2 separate zones, which is a challenge. So we also have a major tank coating project for Gonai Canyon tank. A lot of our tanks are single tanks built up on the hills, and they present challenges on how you provide fire flow and water demands while you take down the tank and repaint it. So a lot of times we have to shuffle zones, do other connections to make that work. It's just the way the system was built. So that's coming soon as well. Well rehabs, we are looking at a next fiscal year, rehabbing wells 44 and 24B. So we do about 2 or 3 a year. We're trying to get on more of a preventative schedule rather than the well pump fails, we got to pull the well, so that's your time to rehab the well. We are working towards more of a preventative schedule, and we're actually coming up with a well maintenance program that will look at the age of the wells and when they were last rehabbed and get them on a schedule We also have funding in our CIP to back that up. So, on that same topic of preventative maintenance, our production crew has replaced all the pumps and motors over the last couple years in all our booster pump stations. I said there was 15 booster pump stations, but each one of those may have 3 to 6 different pumps and motors. So we've gone through and replaced all of those, which has been a big task for those guys. We've also done some preventative maintenance up at Quill. We've dredged out our ponds up there, our raw intake water ponds, which has greatly increased or improved the water quality that we're treating. So that was a big project this last year that we undertook. Future studies, we have a future study on the Timberline and Lakeview areas on building in redundancy to those pump stations. So those are served by a series of, each one of those subdivisions is served by a series of pump stations going up the hill. And we're looking at ways on how we can provide greater redundancy to those pump stations, because they all rely on each other kind of, going up the hill. So that'll be a future study that we're embarking on right now. So on water line replacements, future water line replacements coming up, we have Long Street. We have a small section of Curry Street that connects, that will provide 2 feeds to kind of the Lake Glen area in town. We have a water line replacement project coming up on 5th Street and as well on Colorado Street. So those are in the next couple years. So with that, that's my update, and I'll kick it off to Andy.
Thanks, Eddie. For the record, Andy Hummel, wastewater utility manager for Carson, again. I also wanted to mention, before I jump in on mine, the last 2 pages of your packets are the organizational charts for water and wastewater, if you had any questions or interest there. As far as recent projects on the wastewater side, we just finished up. We've been doing an annual CCTV, closed caption TV, inspection of our sewer lines the last 3 years. So we just finished the 3rd year, getting about 20% of the city with each of those phases. So with a sewer line, it's in order to tell kind of how much life you have left in that line, how it's holding up, if we need to go fix it now, is it going to last another 5-10 years? You basically have to video inspect it to do that. It's not something you can stick your head down the manhole and take a guess. Yeah, Randy would probably been some times he'd love to have had me do that, but that's okay. So with that, we started the first year of that. We really looked at kind of our older areas of the city, and now we're into kind of medium-aged, newer areas, so we can, with that, do a little more analysis of not only our old clay and asbestos cement lines, but even the PVC, how that's holding up. So that'll help drive the line item in our budget for pipeline rehab every year. That's a large part of what we use to decide where that money needs to go first and what needs to be replaced. Another one, our Riverview lift station out on 5th Street. We recently rebuilt that lift station. It was, for those of you in the industry, a wet well, dry well type station. So all the sewage ran into basically a big manhole, and then the pumps were in another chamber next to it. That type of station is difficult to maintain, especially with confined space entry requirements that didn't really exist when those were built. So to get down there and maintain it, it's quite a process. We rebuilt that one as basically a submersible lift station. The pumps are on rails and chains, and when we need to maintain them, you lift them up and they automatically disconnect and away you go. So that one should be good to go for a while. We were able to increase our storage there as well, and eliminated a generator that was out in the middle of the street. We partnered with Water for a new generator at their well site just up the road. So made it look nicer and hopefully be a little quieter for the residents, as well as providing some additional capacity and life there. On the future side, we just started an initial analysis of our dewatering system at the treatment plant. So as the treatment process happens, basically the solids that are in the water, we dry those. We use a centrifuge process, so somewhat like a salad spinner, but flings the water out, and what's left gets put in dumpsters and taken to the landfill for disposal. That operation, that building is, it was built in '95. A lot of the equipment in there is starting to show its age, so if we're gonna look at replacing that in the future, this initial step is kind of what technology is out there today that might be better. How big do we need to make it, that type of stuff. And then another one that we're getting ready to bid, looking at some electrical upgrades at the treatment plant. Some of our feeder lines have been there since it was originally constructed in the 60s. And some of the original circuit breakers, things like that, that they don't just carry down at Lowe's or Home Depot. These are, 400 amp or bigger breakers that if one of them went, in some cases, you're limited to hopefully somebody has one on eBay or another plant took one out of service that might still work. So be good to get that taken care of. From a staffing perspective, we're in a pretty good state right now. We're looking at possibly one retirement in the coming fiscal year. We've had some new staff members join us over the last year, and so far everybody's working out really well, getting their licenses, tests taken, things like that, and getting through probationary periods. So it's good to have a full staff that's motivated. And that's my update. Any questions?
Is it possible to take some tours of your facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. Love to do that. We can have Karen send out an email with the invite and set up some times.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd love to.
Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on something Eddie said. I think you were talking about Lakeview and Timberline, and you indicated that each of them is dependent on a series of pump stations, and that's, if I understood you right, that's the only source to get the water up the hill. I presume you've got some kind of storage up at the top so that if one of those pump stations goes out, you can operate for a little while from the storage.
Yeah, that's correct. We do have in those two areas, we have 2 storage tanks for each zone.
So-
That can last, depending on the demand, depends on how much we have in storage.
Yeah. So the modeling would be, you look at the demand, the cumulative or the aggregate storage of the 2, and you look at the probabilities of one of those pumps going out and one or more, and essentially you're asking yourself the question, gee, if 2 pumps go out, or if this one pump goes out that's very sensitive, how long have we got until we start talking to people about not using water up there in those 2 areas?
Correct, yeah. And so another thing I want to look at in this study is there a way to get another set of pumps or redundant pumps in the pump stations we already have? So
Great.
that's another thing I want to look at.
Thank you for highlighting that, Eddie.
Yeah.
Cindy took the wind out of my sails. I was going to suggest that if there is an opportunity to go out and have a look at both the water and the wastewater facilities. I had a chance, Andy showed me around the plant out on 5th Street, and it was really interesting. The other thing that I would ask, Eddie, you know where all the pipes are, all the wells. Maybe on your next presentation, show a little map to help the slow guy over here.
I would love to. I thought about doing that on this presentation, but I didn't know if it was too much information for you all. But I can do that in the next time, for
We
sure.
we try hard.
Further questions? Thank you. And with that, I believe we're on to agenda item 3, future agenda items. Do any of the committee members have items they would like to put on a future agenda? And then I guess the other one here is tentatively scheduling the next meeting.
Yeah, we kind of talk about them both at the same time. So we're in a little bit of a lull right now, which isn't a bad thing. So the previous 2 years of this committee, we've had a lot more meetings that have been based and centered around the rate study that was going on. That was completed as was presented today, and we don't anticipate going back and looking at the rates, at least in the near future. So right now, the one thing that this committee has to do is what we did today, which is go through the budgets and determine whether or not they're meeting the financial policies. Other than that, it's more of for information only. So we didn't put together a calendar for this year in terms of additional meetings, because until we have additional information to present, there was no reason just to call a meeting to call a meeting. So unless there's a suggestion or something that you specifically want to hear about that we could get calendar, otherwise we'll just stay in touch via email as things kind of come and go and the need to have a meeting, or you can let us know if there's something that you would like to talk about. Otherwise, every meeting, we go through the overview of operations and what's going on within the divisions. That's on every meeting, but no specific topics other than that do we have before us right now. So,
And Darren, has there been sort of a minimum or maximum interval you go without a meeting, or no? So is it?
the latest way it was written was that we would meet, for sure, this meeting that we had here for the budget, and then we would meet as needed. So like I say, last year with the rates going on, I think we met 5 or 6 times in 1 year, but we've also had years where we've only met twice. So it's allowed to fluctuate based off of need. And the chair can call a meeting, or staff can present information to say we have stuff here we would like to present. So,
And would there be a logical time in which you would report on, I guess, just thinking out loud here, at some point you start developing the tentative budget for the next year. Is there a logical time where barring any other reason, have a board meeting or a committee meeting, we'd have a committee meeting just to review plans?
yeah,
for-
that's
as
and
they
we've done
become
that in
clear.
the past, because we didn't have a committee established this year until late, because of old members going off. But typically, we're doing that within the department in the January, February timeframe. So in terms of establishing capital plans and that sort of stuff, so that would be a good time to hold that meeting. We've also held meetings in the fall where we've talked about, we closed out the previous fiscal year and kind of a summation of what was completed in that year. But we haven't had that meeting in the fall to only cover that item. We did that item as well as other things too. So it's pretty much at your what you would prefer, what you would like to see. But I can see a need for a meeting maybe in February before this meeting to give the committee an overview of all the information that was presented today, kind of the background as to where that came from.
Thank you. Any, Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to congratulate and thank the staff and the consultants for a really good job today. People ask a lot of questions, and you all were ready with the answers, and you seem to be doing a fine job, Darren. Thank you.
Randy?
Just to build on what Ron's complimenting staff and the consultant, there's 2 members of the the UFOC they're just outstanding resources. And that's Mike Bennett and Bruce Scott that are not on the board now, but they were for a long, long time. And they added so much to the success of the program that staff has brought forward, as well as the consultant, Far West. I think it's important to note that they did a terrific job, and I just want to make note of that.
That's well spoken, Randy, and I was chagrined to find out today that they were no longer on the committee. So, but I was very impressed in the short time I was on the committee before they departed. Okay. I think we'll leave that to, unless there are further thoughts on the next meeting, I think we'll leave that to be scheduled or suggested scheduling by staff, Darren, and expecting that it would be no later than next February of 2022. Unless there's some reason to call a meeting earlier for something for the committee to consider. Moving on to item 4, public comment. Are there any members of the public present who wish to comment? Seeing none. Item 5, do we have a motion to adjourn?
We're enjoying it so much.
I move to adjourn.
Motion a second? Motion a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unopposed? We're adjourned. Thank you all very much.